Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast.
Welcome to Cannabis Legalization News. Today we have Vivian McPeak joining us. Thank you so much for stopping by. Can you introduce yourself to the audience and give a brief bio?
My name is Vivian McPeak. I have spent the last 25 years as the executive director of Seattle HEMPFEST, and I am right now recently the managing editor of Skunk Magazine, and I had this crazy podcast that I do once in a while as well.
Wow, busy guy. Yeah. So, what's the name of the podcast?
My podcast is called Hempresent.
Hempresent. Is it on video? Because we do ours on YouTube, and then we strip it, and then we put it into the podcast first.
I have such a radio face.
You do
that my show is just the audio.
Okay.
Which means, people can train their eyes on something else.
Right on. Well, there you go. I mean, that's pretty cool. What type of stuff do you talk about on Hempresent?
Oh man, the whole gambit. Of course, talk about cannabis reform and medical cannabis and industrial hemp and industry stuff. But I also kind of break out to kind of do ancillary things like counterculture icons who are still alive and stuff, and things that are kind of tangentially associated with the cannabis culture and whatnot. So it's kind of fun. I kind of not very boxed in. I kind of get to do whatever I want.
Are you going through like your own personal Rolodex? Because I imagine you, a man who's been fighting for cannabis for over 20 years, has quite from Woody Harrelson to Dr. Greenspoon.
I did exhaust my Rolodex at first. Yeah. Yes. That's like the first year. If you go back and look at the first year of my show, that's pretty much my entire Rolodex.
Nice.
And then I kind of branching out. And I've been fortunate. I got about 6 publicists that I work with that handle cannabis people who have been, I've just kind of been lucky,
Yeah.
And I've kind of like building that over time. Yeah. And so I used to have to go, oh God, and chase people down. Hey man, I do this podcast. And now fortunately my inbox, I've got stuff coming in. Yeah. I just interviewed Salvador Santana, Carlos Santana's son, for example, and Niambe Tosh, Peter Tosh's daughter, and stuff like that. So it's been kind of fun,
Yeah.
Just getting the more podcasts, the better. It's about alternative media, and it's about us taking control of the narrative, which is something that the cannabis movement has needed since time immemorial.
That's one of the reasons why Miggy and I got started, was because this industry is complex, it's overregulated, it's poorly understood, and it's hard to get information. And so I wanted to start helpful information regarding the industry and educating people, because so many people want to get in. Have you noticed your involvement in the industry over the past, because since COVID, like how's that affected your business?
Oh, well, business size, it's been devastating. Business wise, I mean, pretty brutal. Frankly, my business is Seattle HEMPFEST. This is our 30th year. We haven't had an event since 2019 because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
About 5 months ago, we lost our store and offices, HEMPFEST Central, which we've had for 8 years, right? Because we were shuttered, right, and had no income coming in, no revenue coming in from any source. It's been pretty devastating, frankly.
Yeah.
And there's not going to be a HEMPFEST this winter. We can't produce the event in 3 months. It takes us all year to do it. And there's other things too that have impacted HEMPFEST's both business model and also our just operating model. We're a volunteer staffed event. We have to fill, at one point it was 1,000, but the last several years about 700 staff shirts with volunteers, with also a 100-person volunteer core group. And, COVID's impacted everybody directly. I mean, who has escaped the impact? It's not named Jeff Bezos or something.
Right.
And prices now of everything are skyrocketing. I mean, life's just hard for everybody. So there's a lot of dynamics that we're dealing with. And having the rug pulled out from us in 2020, by June, it was about June when it was obvious that there wasn't going to be a possibility to have 100,000 person events, right? Being stopped halfway through the production year really wounded us financially. It happened in January with our business model. We would have been in pretty good shape, But having the rug pulled under us halfway through the production year,
Yeah.
we were already on the line for quite a lot of money, and so we're in a real pickle. And our goal is to come back strong in 2020, but that's going to require some earth moving.
Yeah, well, especially a voluntary program. I mean, that's the pandemic's really that's what hurts you, because you can't come out and give your time and
people are hurting economically, right? Everybody's trying to survive.
Yeah.
Rents are up. The price of everything's going up right now. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people relocated. And we have a large group, and the change alone, just on every level. I mean, we even had 5 people die last year, from our organization, because we have such a big group, and when you do something like Seattle HEMPFEST, you need people who are trained and dependable, and professional. You need volunteers that really know what's going on, because you're responsible for 100,000 people's safety, and just the complexity of the nuts and bolts of the logistics of HempFest is really challenging. And so even at our absolute best, it was everything we had to pull that thing off seamlessly, which we did for 28 consecutive events, I'll say. And our stats we've never had a serious injury, accident, arrest at HempFest, which I think is almost miraculous considering the potential that we have there and everything. But it's a big job throwing that, and if you can't do it right, you better not do it.
30 years should have been a big anniversary. The first time I had a booth at HempFest was the 25th anniversary, 2015, I think, at the Space Needle. Kind of a big deal. And this is equally, monumentous, and yet you're not able to have the event. The pandemic kind of shuttered a lot of things. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of lessons. You've learned a lot, and maybe with that, there's advice, or there's maybe things that you would do differently. Kind of a topic that we're kind of focusing on with this tour is what would you do differently? What have you learned, and what advice do you have going through? I'd like to maybe unpack what happened with HempFest. There's boycott Expedia, and there's all of these other things that caused it pre-pandemic to really limit your ability to generate revenue and hold an event.
Yes.
And I think with that, there's a lot to learn, whether it's a cannabis cafe in the East Coast that's trying to open up, or, HempFest itself. Like, maybe there's some people that are listening that have resources, or I don't know. But I think ultimately we'd like to know, what did you learn? What would you do differently? Any advice?
Wow. First of all, you nailed it, Josh. You just nailed it right there. That there were already things happening that were making the economics of HempFest extremely challenging. And just to preface all this, to say that some people are like, oh, you're still doing HempFest? Is that even necessary anymore? Isn't it legal? Which infuriates me, of course, because no, it's not legal. It's federally illegal. And there's people right now in jails and prisons, right? And
regulated, not legal.
Yeah, yes. It's I call it commoditization, right? It's been commoditized. It hasn't really been what I consider legalized. But the semantics of the word legalization are so complex these days. I don't even use the word much anymore. I try to use the word, equality. Like equality. But I don't want to digress on all of that stuff. The biggest thing that happened before the pandemic that wounded us economically is the state passing a restrictive, we believe unconstitutional advertising law that prevents businesses, 502 businesses, from advertising events like HempFest. And before that happened, we would get to December 31st and have $200,000 in the bank after everything had been paid, right? And that's why we had HempFest Central, the store and offices. And finally, after decades of being a 100% volunteer organization, we actually got up to 4 people on salary at one point, right? And for 8 years, we had our store and offices, our little hemp boutique with our offices in back. Because previous to that, everything was kind of going through my house, right? And not just my house, but a bunch of people's houses, right? We were completely decentralized. And there's a point where doing a $750,000 event out of your houses is just really complex, unless you all live together. So that happened, and that really hurt us, because we went from $200,000 at the end of the year to $1,000.
Oh man!
And that's you're chewing your nails, right?
But they changed the law to effectively strip out industry participation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is cold.
Who else is going to advertise at HempFest?
Well, but then again, it's the point of showcasing the industry and having a show about it in the partnership, because the laws aren't perfect. Case in point, that one.
Yeah.
They have a commercial speech right to be able to go and get a booth at a section. I have no idea, but they do this all the time. Like you look at a different state, they always restrict the commercial speech of the cannabis company. And then Budweiser has the bleachers.
Maybe even less than 2 days ago, the United Nations came out calling for a global boycott of cannabis advertising.
Yeah.
And we have, I want to say that our lawyers agree with you that this shouldn't be legal. We have right now in appeals court a legal challenge against the state of Washington, a constitutional legal challenge saying that we believe that the advertising restrictions are unconstitutional and arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
And you know, we feel pretty confident that we have a winning case on that. We'll see how that goes. But yes, it's kind of baffling, you know, because that is a part of a business's free speech.
That's correct.
And I also think, to your credit, most people don't know about HempFest. Like you said, you had no deaths, no arrests, no severe. And all this time, it's because you also use that money to pay for your own security, your own training for medical personnel. Like you have, like you're saying, the volunteers for professional. Like all the time, I volunteer there. You know, like you ask people who have real job experiences and real labor experiences out there, and they come. And like we talked about before, like people better than you are there doing the job, and they all just seem to come to help HempFest at once. And the state hindering you like that really.
I appreciate you pointing that out, Miggy, very much, because, you know, there are what I believe a lot of what I call pot concerts going on that call themselves HempFest, and I don't consider them HempFest because we have a community values model. Yeah. You know, Seattle HEMPFEST has done things that no other pot rally in the world cared to even think about. Yeah. To try to be the most socially responsible event. We rent extra heart defibrillators and have them placed throughout the event because it's long and thin and packed. I don't know of another, a pot event who even knows probably what AED means, right? Yeah. Which is the medical term for a heart defibrillator. We have stop the bleed kits on our stages in case, God forbid, there would be some kind of a catastrophic injury. Yeah. We're like the Eagle Scouts of the cannabis. We have our own trained safety patrol. Yeah. That's their internal security, which is why there's very few police in the event. They're actually outside of the event. We actually had the surreal experience several years ago where we had to contact the police and go, could you come through the event once in a while and show your presence? We have 100,000 people in here and would kind of help us out if you would have a presence, right? And we're just like, is this really happening? I'm really asking the cops to come into our pot rally.
Please help us.
But, it's a lot of people there. But statistically, if you got 100,000 people, you probably have some murderers. Yeah. You have thieves. You have...
Especially in this industry. But then, so was there a permit? Did you have a permit from the city to be able to have a cannabis event? How does that work?
Wow, yes. Multiple. And we're talking about 1 year of negotiation with the Seattle Special Events Committee and the Parks Department at the minimum, right? And the Port of Seattle and the Olympic Sculpture Park, because we're on 3 different parcels of land. Mm-hmm. So we're dealing with 3 different entities, right, that all have their pet peeves. But yes, we have to go to these meetings with the city that have this huge giant table that's the size of this room, a big square collection of tables with about 20 departments from the city and plus the LCB, which has started to come in the last few years, which is a whole nother. We could probably do a whole show on that. Yeah.
That's the regulators, the Liquor and Cannabis Board. Right.
Yes, the Liquor and Cannabis Board. And every one of them has to sign off on every nano particle of our 150 pages of plans. We have a safety plan and a evacuation plan and a parking plan, and it goes on and on and on. Yeah. And we have traditionally gotten the permit literally the night before the event on the last couple of years, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And the permit's 75 pages long, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Right, with all the things that you have to do. And,
Well,
you know,
this is something that the people that are tuning in, a lot of people call and they want to do cannabis events, or they want to do a consumption lounge business model. You've been dealing with a cannabis event for decades. What advice would you give to some startup entrepreneur that's like, I'm going to have a cannabis event in Illinois or New Jersey or New York, Virginia?
And include maybe the difficulties of having corporate authority or authorization, rather, in order to have the event.
Sure, and I can approach both your questions kind of at the same time. And the first thing I want to say is what have you learned? And the number one overarching truth that I've learned doing 30 years of Seattle HEMPFEST is politics trumps the law. And what I mean by that, if they want to bust you, you're done. If they don't want to bust you, they don't bust you, right? And what I mean by that is, you know, HempFest is in one of the most liberal cities in America, right? Which is why we got grandfathered in, first of all. If you tried to start an event with 100,000 people smoking pot, it would never happen, right? But we kind of started slow. And because we were in this tremendously permissive, progressive city, I believe that's one of the only reasons that HempFest was able to get to the point, you know, that we got. If you tried to do that in, you know, I don't know, Mississippi or something like that, it never would have flown, right? So politics trumps the law. And what I mean, and so you can unpack that in a lot of ways, right? My advice is don't assume that you have enemies with anybody off the bat, number one. Number two, don't make enemies where you don't have them. Don't be cocky. Don't say a bunch of crazy stuff on the media and accuse people of stuff and things like that. Try to fly under the radar and try to really address their legitimate concerns up front. There's legitimate concerns: security, sanitation, parking. I mean, these are very legitimate concerns. Remember that these people are doing their job, even if they don't like you, even if there's a cultural barrier, which there would be in, you know, some places. They have a job to do as well, and respect that, right? And take that stuff seriously. You know, are you going to have a big event? Well, you better have some first aid, man. I've been to events; they don't have any first aid. Some they don't even have water. I'm like, did you guys think I have some water? You know, there's people with heat exhaustion, you know, and they were just in to make some money, right? They just, hey, we got some vendors, you know, we booked, some awesome pot bands. We have Los Marijuanos, you know, or Red Man or something like that, and that's it. Right? They're just out to kind of have what I call a pot concert and make some money. Or you're going to have a community values event that's educational, and where you put public safety as your number one priority. Our number one goal at HempFest is not to legalize cannabis. Our number one goal is that nobody gets hurt, right? And you know, I've had a saying for years: if nobody's hurt, if we're not busted, and the money's not missing, it's not a crisis. It's a situation, and we can deal with it. Though that's my definition of a crisis. It's one of those three things, right? So that's my first piece of advice: is come at it professionally and responsibly, because that's 50% of it right there. You know, if you got that stuff nailed down, now it's going to be harder for them to prevent you from having your event. Because one thing we've learned with COVID, which is the second rule of thumb, I would say that I've learned, is that the only thing that trumps, and I hate to use that word, but in the lack of a better word, the only thing that overcomes free speech is public safety, right? And so, you know, there's only two ways that they can stop a free speech event that from my perspective, actually. Number one is public safety, which means have it nailed, you know, have it wired, and don't screw up, right? Number two, price you out of existence. Well, you can have your event. We're not denying your free speech event. Oh, we would never think of doing that. But you got to supply this and this and this. You got to provide this and this and this. And you got to jump to this. You know what I mean?
And who took out the money on the corporate sponsorship? Was that local or was that a state law that they passed?
Oh, that's a state legislature passed that.
So then the state comes in and then just cuts off funds.
Proactively. Yes.
But
and you know why? Oh, the children and this kind of stuff, right? But I can think right now of a very popular, like 40-year street fair that happens in Seattle that has the Red Hook stage with giant 12-foot banners of beer bottles on both sides, directly across from the beer garden.
Is this the Budweiser bleachers?
Directly across from the beer garden, where people are drinking beer in full view of children walking by everywhere, right? And somehow that's okay, but we can't let the children see the marijuana images, right? Which is why, to me, I'm not for legalization anymore. I'm for equality. I want equality with the alcohol, tobacco industries, etc. Right? We should be able to do the same things that they can do.
We were just talking about that outside before you showed up.
And if you can in Washington State brew your own alcohol, or 20,000 gallons of spirits or whatever, then you should be able to grow your own cannabis. It's equality. That's my new word. Legalization means different things to different people.
How many bars are in Seattle?
2.
That have Budweiser. They have these just in the window, right? They got Budweiser shit, right? Or
Coronas
stuff, right?
This is on the internet.
We're good.
As long as you don't curse too much, you don't get flagged, but they will still flag us for the subject matter, despite the subject matter being really important to the fundamental concepts of America. We will still be flagged.
Yep. But I know, I just the other day, I walked by a bar that had tables out on the patio right next to the sidewalk with just like a little, velvet rope like they have in the theater separating the sidewalk, and with people sitting there drinking beer right in front of me.
It's a magic rope, though. It makes us
yes, right? Yeah. So if they can do that, then why couldn't they be doing some edibles or vaping or whatever, right? Okay, smoking pot creates a bunch of smoke. Okay, whatever, non-issue to me, but I can understand. Makes some people uncomfortable. But the idea is, if I would want my child to be exposed to cannabis way before I saw them exposed to tobacco and alcohol use. We have a 25-foot rule here in Seattle that you can't smoke a cigarette 25 feet from the entrance of a business. Has anybody ever enforced that anywhere? I mean, every single day I see employees sitting right next to it.
Yeah. What you've always talked about like the permit situation, because I know people don't understand for such a big event that your negotiations start pretty much the day after you're done wrapping up the first event. But you always talk about how like you get the authorization last minute for the most part. And I know like we're in this liberal paradise nirvana, but for the most part, do you feel like it's the Seattle administration that's against you sometimes? It seems like they want a nickel and dime where you think they would embrace it because you bring in 100,000 people to the city who do buy drinks and food and spend in the city. You're part of, I think you help like with the cruise ship industry, these things bring in money and you should embrace these things, not try and nickel and dime the organization itself. Do you feel that the Seattle administration's against you somehow?
I would say yes and no. First of all, we contracted a economic impact statement in 2014 with a professor at the University of Washington that estimated that we bring in $7.1 million into King County over the course of HempFest, and that we supported, I think, 120 jobs or something like that, right? So yeah, you don't bring 100,000 people and people from other states and some people from other countries without them spending money, right? So there's that, right? And then all of the fencing, and we're spending $750,000 regionally, locally, with all these companies and stuff. But when you're dealing with the city, you're dealing with not just a monolithic entity, right? You're dealing with all these various departments and agencies and stuff. And some of them, I think, are more supportive than others, and some individuals are more supportive than others. Because there's, with cannabis, there's still and will be for the rest of our lifetimes a cultural divide. But someday that'll be gone. Like
very impressed with how fast stuff's moved, though. Like the concepts of what's what's okay and acceptable 20 years ago is different now, and so it's going to be completely different.
How did that happen?
Right?
I don't know, but then like maybe
but we've also seen a cancel culture. There's been online. There's been issues with political or things that cannabis, for example, has been deleted from Instagram and Facebook and everything. Forever,
YouTube, right?
And there's still a lot of corporations that are pushing back on this inevitable legalization. Talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges you had with some companies that don't enjoy what you're doing with HempFest.
Sure. I'll preface that to say that we always believe that if we could just stay along long enough, we could rely on mainstream advertising. Right? That someday you know, Key Bank or Kia Cars or something was going to come in, because we have 100,000 people. That's $1 million demographic or millions for a conventional event. But you know, HempFest is different. But yes, HempFest is down on Merlitters Park on the Puget Sound, which is, you know, arguably downtown Seattle on the waterfront. And we were for years adjacent to the Amgen complex. You know, our event literally ended right up against the Amgen pharmaceutical complex, which was a high security complex, right? And they were great to work with. Believe it or not, Amgen was really easy to work with. And then Expedia bought it
that's right.
several years ago, right? And we always thought, well, Expedia, didn't they was started by deadheads, right? You know, wow, that should be cool, right? Not so.
But was it started by deadheads?
That's what I understood, yes.
But we'll fact check that
one
later.
They sold it, right?
Yeah, they made their money.
So not only did Expedia buy the facility, but somehow they bought the road, the service road, which is the back end road into Seattle HEMPFEST, into the Centennial Park, right? Which was a city road, right? But it was called Amgen Way, right? Which means there was an easement that was done with Amgen, and I'm not a you know, real estate attorney, so I find all that stuff, you know, confusing for me. But somehow Expedia was able to buy that road, and that's the back road that we've loaded in, you know, an insane amount of infrastructure to avoid the clusterfuck, I guess I can say, of Alaskan and Broad, right? Which is the front entrance of HempFest, which is, you know, a traffic nightmare on a good day, with, you know, a massive interruption of business, commerce, and all kinds of stuff if you're doing a HempFest. And so, you know, Expedia came in and immediately said, well, you know, anybody else can use that road except HempFest. Right? And we're just like, what? Wait a minute. You know, first of all, what do you mean we can't use a road that we've been using for 25 years? Well, we're having a bunch of construction and everything, and it'll be disruptive, you know. And so that was a nightmare for us. We even had them to, and so, you know, we tried to do our usual thing of like, hey, you know, let's work together, you know, let's meet and we can figure this out, you know, and to our mutual interests and stuff, right? And Expedia is just like, you know, to us. And so then we're like, hey, we have people traveling from all over the world to HempFest and stuff. What a great opportunity for Expedia, right? To get your brand out, right? And you're just like, talk to the hand, right?
They're like not on your life.
And so then we're like, our lawyers were like, look, we can figure everything else out coming from the South End, even though it's a massive nightmare and it's going to cost us a bunch of money and it's going to even more piss off the downtown waterfront businesses. But we have no way to bring the music in. There's no way to bring the bands in from that way. That won't work because everything else comes in before HempFest, and then it's there, and then it leaves after HempFest. But the bands are coming in all day, every day to multiple stages.
Oh my God!
Right? And once you have HempFest going or permit, you can't have a vehicle enter HempFest once you open. Right? We got golf carts in there moving around, but there's no vehicles, which means we can't bring in band equipment, right?
Speakers
and stuff during. I mean, just their gear,
drum
right?
Kits,
and you know, if you ever ask a musician to come in at 6 a.m. for their gig at 2 p.m., you know, I mean, that's just not workable.
Never gonna happen.
So we're like, we had to negotiate with Expedia with our lawyers saying, you got to let us at least bring in, you know, our bands.
Oh my God.
You know what they said? They finally said, well, you can bring in 6 vehicles a day or per hour. And if you bring in, if a 7th one shows up, it's going to cost $250 for the first one, going up to $2,500 a vehicle. Fine. Wow. Right? And we're like, what? You know? And I don't know how much our legal team would like me saying all of this publicly. The rare chance there's another HempFest down there with Expedia. But so, yes, you know, and let me just say that that's not the first time that we've had to have an issue with our neighbors. I have gone and given presentations with the Queen Anne community council, the Waterfront Business Association, you know, I could go on, and met them and said, hey, my name's Jimmy Peak. Here I am. Let me hear your issues, you know. Here's a one sheet for the things that we believe we're doing to mitigate what we believe your issues are, whether it's, you know, trash and things like that.
Yeah.
And you know, and we have had to tangle several times. I guess I could continue my dumpster fire of talking about businesses that we work with a little bit, because I assume they won't be listening.
Yeah.
The Edgewater Hotel.
Oh no.
Right, the famous Edgewater, the Beatles, you know, fished off over and stuff. They went to the city with, and there, by the way, the Edgewater's packed. You can't rent a room in the Edgewater for the week the HempFest is happening, right?
Yeah.
They sent the city pictures of, here's a glass pipe that was left in one of our elevators during HempFest. Here's a sign that someone left in our lobby.
We don't want these kind of people as boarders.
Here's vomit in the parking lot. They actually had a picture of vomit in the parking lot, you know.
It must be a pothead that did that.
Yeah,
and we're like, wait a minute, you had 3 wedding receptions that day.
Oh my God.
That same day. Why is it, you know what I mean? And then we had, you know, I think, I forget what business it was down on Elliott, call us up, you know, because we instituted this thing on our website, a community impact form, you know, immediately if you have a problem, you know, fill out this form during HempFest, you know, and right there we'll be reviewing it, we'll deal with it. So we got this thing saying there's all kinds of food and stuff in front of my business, you know, and this is a business that's like a mile down from HempFest. And so we actually dropped everything, sent somebody down there, 7 French fries on the sidewalk.
What?
Right. So this is the kind of thing that we put up with.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And if you're HempFest, your trash stinks worse than everybody else's. You know? We're like, well, you know, what about 4th of July, you know, or something like that.
So do you see a lot of extra fees down there along with the things that you're going through?
Oh, we have to pay.
Yeah.
One of our permit requirements is that we pay the downtown and ambassadors, I forget what they're called, but the guys that clean the streets, we have to pay to have them clean all the way down Elliott, Alaskan Way, like way down, you know, practically to Pioneer Square was one of the requirements from
beyond where HempFest is at.
Way beyond where we know that we have impact.
Yeah.
I swear to God, it's like a pay to play thing,
Yeah.
right? So my advice for anybody,
oh, go ahead.
I'm just going to say my advice is proactively go to the police department, proactively go to the health department, proactively go to the surrounding businesses and say, hey, here we are. This is what we plan to do. You know, what are your concerns? Right. And sometimes, you know, sometimes it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission in some situations. Right. Yeah. So it's delicate and you might go, God, I wish you had never asked that. But you're going to have to deal with it anyway. Go there before, establish a relationship. It's a lot harder to hate somebody whose face and name you know and who has tried to open up a dialogue with you, right? And it won't make anything any worse, right? They won't hate you anymore because you went and tried to address their issues, right? Yeah. In the early days of HempFest, we had our first biggest HempFest at Gasworks Park in '94. About 15,000 people. It shut down Wallingford. There were people that couldn't get to their homes. The traffic was so bad that they couldn't make it to their house. They had to park blocks away and walk, right? It was a real problem. And so we maxed out Gasworks in 1 year. And so the city's like, hey, you have to come to you have to be a special event now, right? And we're like, what's that? You know, that's a whole different like level of event with all these different requirements. And you have to come to a special events committee meeting. Oh my God. That was in '94. It was the first one that we went to. We've been a special event ever since then. And that's up in the 7th floor of the Muni building in the city attorney's office. And, you know, and we had been throwing out joints from the stage, live plants on the stage and stuff, right? And we're just like, what? You know, the city attorney's office, and we were petrified. You know, we were like, are they going to pull out pictures, you know, of us breaking the law and stuff? You know, we just didn't know what to expect.
Oh, my God.
But I put together a one sheet, right? I said, okay, what are their issues going to be? It's going to be sanitation. It's going to be security. It's going to be parking. You know, and stuff. So I put out a one sheet that addressed, you know, had bullet points of what we were going to do, what our plans were, porta potties. We have this many porta potties, you know, and, you know, our parking can handle here and our security is going to be handled by this and that. And so we get there and it's this table, you know, with all the things. And Virginia Swanson was the chair, a real intense person, man. Love her to death, but man, is she intense. and professional. And she's like, well, Vivian, I guess I'll allow you to make your initial presentation.
Oh, well, thank you.
This might be the first cannabis license issued by any government, in the history of the history. But well, except for, but that's not a cannabis license. What does Irv Rosenfeld have? That's a prescription, because there was that federal program.
He's got a federal prescription for cannabis, right?
But that's not a license. This is a license.
Here's what I would agree with. This is probably the first special event permit issued to a cannabis event in the country, right? And so I'm like, well, Virginia, as you know, we've never been before the committee and don't know what the proper protocols are, but I've taken the liberty to put together a brief one sheet that I believe addresses the concerns, and I passed it out, right? And to my amazement, she went around the room and like the fire department's, well, no, this covers it for us. This is good, And Parks is like, no, this is good. And it was the police. She got to the police and he goes, this is completely unacceptable, and we're going to have a subcommittee meeting and all this stuff, and that it was only the police that weren't happy with what I put together, and so we had the subcommittee meeting, and the captain at the time, and I remember he was so agitated, his face was beet red, and he had this. Even my partner who was with me said, "Did you see the vein pumping in his soap?" And I go, "Yeah, I did." And he's like, "This is going to blow our entire budget." And she's like, "This is the special events chair from the Parks Department was like, this is a First Amendment protected free speech event. That's not their problem." Right? We'll address that after the meeting. Right? I'm like, whoa, did she just really shut down the captain, the police?
That's great.
And so he's like, well, you're going to need to have 300 licensed and bonded security people. Right? And so we came back and said, well, how about 50 Q Patrol? And that was the queer patrol on Capitol Hill at the time, right? That had sprung up because of the beatings and stuff, right? And he's like, well, the queer patrol, well, they're not qualified to do that. I go, well, that's interesting since the city has licensed them to patrol 3 city parks. Oh, right? Yeah. And they're just like, and then guess what we got?
Nice.
We got 50 Q Patrol as our security guys.
Right? That is a great moment in weed history right there.
I forgot about that because there was those beatings up on Broadway, and
they're like the guardian angels, except cool, right?
Yeah.
And they did not deal with drugs or anything like that. They had berets, and radios and stuff.
Right.
And so for the first, maybe I think 2, maybe 3 years, our security was the Q Patrol, right? And they were great people to work with, totally professional.
Yeah. People think of Seattle as a super liberal area, but I remember in the early 90s that you would see Nazi skinheads walking up on Broadway proud, like the Proud Boys. And it wasn't, that's where the beatings happened. That's where they needed the protection. And now it's so liberal. Like if you see a Nazi, you're like, what the hell is that guy doing?
Remember that Nazi got punched in the face not long ago downtown?
That's what I mean. Like that type of how far we've gone. I don't know what it's going to be in another 20 years. If the amount of acceptance can be that large, but people are going to have to change their opinion on something they've had for a while. Weed is bad. Okay. Like it's just evil. That's toxic. I hate its smell. I mean, like they're just prejudiced against it. Hopefully that drops off as it becomes more prevalent and we actually discuss the realities, because you talk about equality between alcohol and cannabis. They aren't equal. Alcohol is substantially worse for you if you look at any measure of science. And so I just hope that we can get to that level. I mean, I think it's night and day from Nazis to complete liberals in 20 years, but from abject prejudice toward the plant and no understanding to understanding it and being like, oh yeah, it's weed.
I think it's a generational thing.
Yeah.
I think it's literally a matter of a handful of years until the generation that the last generation that was brainwashed is gone, or is not a factor anymore, right? Maybe not gone, but
retired
no longer.
From the
yes, exactly.
Decision-making scene.
Yes, exactly, right. By the way, you mentioned that just very briefly. When we started HempFest 30 years ago, we had to deal with all these. You have to go to the bank, and you've got to go to try to open up a bank account. Boy, what's the name of the bank? Seattle HEMPFEST. Right? Wow. The eyes narrow. They look at each other, right? They give them the look, right? Look back at you. And we had to go get a permit from this agency and this agency, right? And initially, these people were older than us, and they were all from the old guard, right? And they're like, druggies came in here with this thing, this drug fest, right? And you could just tell. And then slowly over time, those people retired, and we're still going, right? And they're replaced by somebody else who's younger, right? Because that's how it works, right? And then finally we got to a point where, you know, the Parks Department person that we had to deal with is like the new guy. And keep in mind, he's new to the job. We've been doing this for decades, right? So sometimes we're like telling them how it's going to be. But he's like, oh man, HempFest, I was 15 with dreadlocks when I went to my first HempFest, Vivian, man. Yeah, really great to meet you, right? Oh and I'm like, oh my God, we have outlived, you know, we have been around so long that the whole thing's changed. And now you go to the bank and this, you know, middle-aged lady, oh, HempFest, has it happened yet? Have I missed it? Oh. Right? And it's like, when you're saying things are changing, and it's like night and day and all, and then legalization, well, then 502 happened. And now it's like legitimized, right? And so now it's even more different, right? And so people are like, oh man, you guys did it, and this kind of thing, right? Where before it was like, oh, you know, really, you know, the druggies are here.
That's right.
And so it's happening, you know, it's happening.
So what is HempFest going to look like? Is there, with Myrtle Edwards Park not being a legit, feasible workaround with Expedia blocking your access, where are you going to go, or how do you restart? Because essentially you're in the same position a lot of other event planners are of starting. You're going to have to restart. What does that look like? What's the future of HempFest?
Well, I'm not going to go as far as to say that Myrtle Edwards Park's no longer viable, because we pulled off that event in 2019 with Expedia there, right? By the way, Expedia got savaged by the COVID pandemic, right? Travel company, right?
Hubris,
and they're having some issues, and I'll just leave it at that.
Karma.
But we don't. Yeah, the problem with HempFest, you know, is that there's no other venue in Seattle that can accommodate it. And there's a multi-pronged criteria, and that starts with, does public transit go to it? Is there parking in the surrounding area? Is there an existing perimeter already, pre-existing perimeter for a 100,000 person event? Because fencing, something like that, is insane, and what have you. And minimal business and residential impact, right? And, you know, we've looked at a lot of places. We had several meetings with Seattle Center, wouldn't have us, right? Oh, we've got children events happening here and stuff. Like, well, like, you have Beer Fest there. Right?
The children event has a beer garden.
Really? Beer Fest, right? And we're like, whatever, you know.
It's not like we're Weed Fest. We're at least calling ourselves Hemp.
And we met with the you know, people from Magnuson Park community, you know, the Magnuson Neighborhood Council or whatever it's called. I forget, it was so long ago, right? And Magnuson posed a lot of problems. One thing, you have to bus everybody in. There's not parking. You know, remember that Pearl Jam thing they did there? They had to bus everybody in. It broke down. It was a disaster. And at Magnuson, there's environmental concerns. They've got marshland and stuff there, and a lot of just weird, like, little hanky areas that people could walk off and there'd be no way to see them, what they're doing and stuff, which is something we think about, you know. And there's just no other venue inside of Seattle that can handle Seattle HempFest. So that's been an issue for a long time for us. And man, if there was, we'd go there, because Myrtle Edwards is logistically very challenging for us. And as you all know, there's water on one side with rocks, and there's a fence with a railroad track on the other side, and it's 1.3 miles long, right? And it was a little better once the bridge came in, the Thomas Street footbridge. That allowed us a little bit of an escape hatch right in the middle. But it's just a challenging location.
Huge venue,
and so, you know, there have been the idea that maybe we'd bring it outside of the city of Seattle and make it the Washington State HempFest or the Great American HempFest or who knows what, right?
Just HempFest. I don't think you're competing against anyone else at all. I mean, like,
we got lots of islands we can rent.
There are a lot of HempFests, right? But we do have a trademark on the term HempFest. We have a federal trademark on the term, so that's actually a viable concept. So, you know, we haven't canceled out Myrtle Edwards Park. It is hallowed ground. There's about 7 or 8 of our former staff members whose ashes are spread on Myrtle Edwards Park, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if that's legal or not, but there's other things that aren't legal that have happened there. So, so it's a very sacred place to us. It's a gem of a place. I mean, it's right. I mean, how you can't beat the view, man. The ambiance, the environment.
Correct.
Everything just kind of blows away and it's gone real fast, you know. But that's a big unknown. That's a big unknown. And you know, I mean, there are places far outside of Seattle. You know, people go to the Gorge. You know, people go to events that are hours away. So,
as an entity, are you guys still meeting then? So is HempFest the core people still meeting? So
oh yeah, every month.
Okay.
The core group of Seattle HempFest has met every month since 1998, without failing a month. The board of directors meets every month or bi-monthly since 1999. And it's all Zoom now, right? We've been doing the Zoom meetings and stuff for quite a while, of course, like everybody else. But yeah, we've never missed a meeting in all that time. We're still coming together. We're still talking. It's been stressful.
I bet.
I mean, stressful.
Let's wrap this up with maybe the most interesting podcast interview you've done. So we've talked a lot about HempFest, but with your interviews, is there an interview you've done that is memorable or interesting that you liked, or is your favorite, or for whatever reason? You've done a lot. What is something that comes to your mind that you would like to share or do again or whatever?
Sure. And if I could just very quick, there is something happening. We are doing something this year. If I could just plug that real quick. And that is, we've hooked up with the Full Spectrum and Neil Laquia. And we're doing something called the Great Green Sweep, right? And what it is we are trying to, employing our same kind of community volunteer model, organize 30 trash cleanups nationwide, starting on July 24th. And then HempFest is going to do our part of it on August 21st, which is our normal weekend. And we're asking people to go out in their neighborhood, excuse me, and collect trash with a specific focus on single-use plastics, which we know breaks down into microplastics and goes into Puget Sound and destroys the biosphere, and stuff like that. And then we are going to have a live stream associated with that on the 21st and 22nd, a HempFest cleanup in the morning, and then some panel discussions and music. We've got like Jason Lammers going to talk about cannabis packaging, which is a big pet peeve of mine, is the single-use plastics and cannabis packaging. And we're talking to Joy Beckerman about putting together a panel for hemp plastics, biodegradable hemp plastics like Santa Packaging is doing.
We had them on our show before.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Because, man, if there's no biosphere, every other issue, you know, pot legalization won't matter. If we see the hellscape coming right now. I mean, it's happening right this moment. You know,
those stuff are.
Germany's underwater. You know, and California's on fire, right? I mean, it's just starting. It's no pun intended, the tip of the iceberg, right?
This is Jason's Jube Tube, made out of 100% recycled material, made in the U.S. So it's cheaper than what you would get in China, made locally, and it's from recycled materials. So.
And the cannabis industry, our culture is supposed to be better. We're supposed to be better than the mainstream culture, man. We're supposed to be more, woke, for lack of a better word. So I want to answer your question, and that's a hard question to answer. But I want to say that the with all the the politicians and the celebrities and the cannabis people, I recently interviewed a woman in Georgia whose son has he's got about 20 different illnesses. He was born a micropreemie at birth, and he was like this big when he was born, and he's got an aggressive form of, along everything else that he has an aggressive form of seizure disorder where the seizures are so bad that they could kill him, right? And I have interviewed on my show the parent of a child who needs either epilepsy or Dravet syndrome, who needs cannabis oil. I've interviewed a parent in Ireland, New Zealand, South Africa, England, South America, right? This is going on all over the world.
Yeah.
And it's the same story. The only thing that's different with their stories is the accents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this woman is fighting to get her son cannabis oil in Georgia. Now, Georgia has a medical marijuana program, right? You can get a medical marijuana card. There's nowhere to get the cannabis from. It's worthless, right? And they don't allow smokable cannabis, right? Anyway, but there's also no access to anything, right? And her story is so dramatic. She literally has to have a baby monitor, right, in the child's room because he may die at any moment, right? She's got to be aware of him 24 hours a day, right? And she's been condemned. You know, she's been in the media and stuff, and it's like, you know, oh, you just want to get your kid high, and God's going to punish you, and you know, you're a monster and a druggie, and she's had to put up with all this discrimination and all of this condemnation, and all she's trying to do is keep her son alive, right?
Seriously.
And there's, you know, and people going through this, you know, like Charlotte from Charlotte's Web, right, who's the one that turned Sanjay Gupta around, right, and then eventually, tragically, COVID took her life, right? But I wanna highlight that one interview because it demonstrates better than anything else that we're not done. You know, that we still have the heavy lifting to do. Days ago, the Schumer bill, the Democrats came forth and presented a bill to actually end federal cannabis legalization. It's a mixed bag, of course, you know, being cannabis, you know, at 25% tax on top of the state tax. It's like, what is this? The black market perpetuation bill? Is that the right?
GMP on all processors.
And you know, federal regulations imposed on state regulations, right?
And then I love, this is the thing that I love the book, because we reviewed the federal one, and it's cumbersome. It's a lot of regulations. And then one of the facts that they find, and one of the bases for the law, is to reduce the burden of accessing the cannabis industry, to lower the market entrance so that mom and pop stores and social equity applicants can get in. And then you read all the regulations, and you're like, did they just put that in there to make themselves feel better?
The good things it does is it does deschedule, right? And it does expunge records. I know you got to end and stuff like that. And the thing that the last thing I want to say though on all of that is that the one thing I see the most encouraging to me, the new thing that's changed, is the social equity thing, that the states that have flipped so far lately, the last ones, which have been state legislatures, citizen initiatives, which is another good sign. They've been building, albeit inadequate, but they've been building in social equity components proactively. That's new. You know, that's another front where progress being made, another reason to be a little bit
think about that.
optimistic.
Totally.
Good place to end. Thank you so much for talking to us. I mean, I get so many people asking about the type of license that they can have, a consumption lounge or have an event, and what type of permits do they need. And I'm like, should talk to Vivian.
HempFest at hempfest.org if you want to find out about our green sweep thing going on, or if you're just going to want to tap us for a little counsel on how to do it.
Hemp% where? Where's Hemp% at?
Hemp%, just Google Hemp%. It's like the word hemp and resent, even though we don't resent the hemp. Hemp%, just Google that, or you can go to cannabisradio.com.
Right on.
All right. With that, we're going to roll this one up. Vivian McPeak, HempFest. We also got cannabis legalization news. Mickey 420, Tom Howard. I'm Josh Kincaid with the Talking Hedge.
We're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out. Smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.